Okay, so what if I told you that the most important war in history isn't one you've read about in textbooks? We're diving into the work of Robert Ingraham, who puts forward this incredible thesis that for millennia, history has been shaped by one single conflict, a war not of nations, but of two totally opposite ideas about what it means to be human.
So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we're going to look at this core war of ideas. Then we'll trace the roots of what Ingram calls the empire, all the way back to its ancient origins. From there, we'll see how Venice created the blueprint for a new kind of control, how that morphed into the modern system, and finally, what the author argues is its designated enemy.
All right, so let's get right into the heart of it. Ingram's whole argument is that history isn't just one random thing after another. Instead, he says it's an axiomatic struggle. Now that's just a fancy way of saying that conflict starts from two completely different, non-negotiable starting points about the very nature of humanity itself. You can't compromise between them. One has to win.
And this, right here, lays out the two sides of that war. On the left, you have the idea of the Commonwealth, summed up beautifully by Schiller. It sees people as fundamentally creative, noble, and capable of reason. But on the right, well, you get the view of the empire. That quote from Bertrand Russell is just chilling, isn't it? It's the idea that most people are basically just animals, and to the ruling class, their suffering is irrelevant.
So where did this, frankly, ugly view of humanity come from? According to Ingram, it's not new. He argues its philosophical weapons, the very ideas used to justify it, were forged way back in the ancient world, specifically inside the Roman Empire.
And this is a key piece of evidence he presents: Roman law. You know, this might seem like dry legal stuff, but look closely at the definition. It explicitly says that natural law applies to all animals, not just humans. He argues this is no accident. It's a way to legally erase the distinction between a person and a beast, denying the one thing that makes us special, our creative reason.
So you've got this toolkit for control. Roman law, which makes oligarchy and even slavery the foundation of society. Then you have Aristotelianism, which, Ingram argues, provides the philosophical cover. It says the universe is fixed, it's already perfected, so real human creativity and fundamental change, impossible. And finally, the feudal system, which he traces right back to Roman tax collection, physically trapping most people on the land as serfs.
So Rome falls, right? But what happens to this idea of empire? Well, according to the book, it didn't die. It just moved. And it got a major upgrade in Venice. The Venetians perfected the model, shifting the basis of power away from conquering armies and towards something much more abstract and powerful: finance.
And this is how they did it. Venice didn't need to roll tanks through Europe. It became the godfather of the whole banking system. By controlling the money supply, the gold and silver, it could trap kings and kingdoms in webs of debt. It was a new kind of empire, one that could rule from a distance, all without firing a single shot.
And what's the end result of a system built entirely on usury and financial bubbles? Catastrophe. The author argues that the collapse of this Venetian Lombard system led directly to a new dark age with famines and chaos. And the horrifying peak of it all was the Black Death, wiping out an estimated 30% of Europe's entire population.
But out of that absolute horror, something amazing happened. A counterattack was launched. The Renaissance, sparked at gatherings like the Council of Florence, wasn't just about beautiful paintings. Ingram frames it as a full frontal assault on the empire's philosophy. It championed a revolutionary new idea, a civilization of sovereign nation-states, all dedicated to the common good of their people.
Now, the empire wasn't just going to give up. Faced with this powerful new idea of the Commonwealth, the oligarchy in Venice knew it had to adapt or die. And in 1582, a political coup in Venice led to the birth of a newer, slicker, and much more dangerous form of empire. You can literally watch the evolution happen on this timeline. You see Venice rise, then the Renaissance pushes back. Then comes the critical turning point in 1582 with this Giovanni Revolution. And after that, notice how the system's headquarters moves north, first to Amsterdam, and then finally, it sets up shop in London, becoming what we now call the Anglo-Dutch Empire.
The book points to one man as the chief architect of this new system, Paolo Sarpi. His genius, if you can call it that, was realizing that the best way to control people wasn't with soldiers, but by controlling how they think. He understood that if you could trap people in mental chains, philosophies like empiricism that deny universal truths, you could keep them enslaved forever.
And here's the playbook Sarpi's group used. It's a four-step process. First, the financiers don't just influence the government, they take it over. Then, they set up a public bank that's actually privately controlled. That bank gets a government-backed monopoly on creating money. And finally, they move the whole operation to a new, safer location. Sound familiar? This is the birth of the modern central banking system.
So this brings us to the final chapter of this story. Because that Commonwealth idea, the one that sparked the Renaissance, it didn't just vanish. According to Ingraham, it found a home. It crossed the Atlantic and became the founding principle of the United States of America, a nation designed from the ground up to be the enemy of empire.
And this comparison from James Fenimore Cooper just nails the difference. It all comes down to one question. Where does power come from? In the European imperial system, power is at the top. The people, the subjects, have to fight and claw for every little right they get. But in the American system, it's flipped upside down. The people are sovereign. They have the rights, and they loan a little bit of that power to the state for their own protection. They are fundamentally different worlds.
As the economist Henry C. Carey put it back in the 19th century, these two systems are in a permanent state of war. They have completely opposite goals. One system's endgame is, essentially, barbarism and control. The other's is civilization and progress. There's no middle ground.
And this is really the electrifying conclusion of the entire book. It argues that the United States isn't just another country. Its very existence is a challenge to this ancient imperial system. Its historical mission, whether it always knows it or not, is to be the force that finally, once and for all, gets rid of this idea of empire.
So that leaves us with a pretty heavy question to think about. If this centuries-long war of ideas is still the main event, if it's still playing out, what does that fight between the principle of empire and the principle of commonwealth actually look like in our modern interconnected world?